Hello, class. Scott again. Here for the week 2 discussion on old John Milton. With me, representing Star Wars yet again. I'm going to try and get a little piece of my Star Wars love in every single video. So we have R2 with us in the background. Huge Lego fan. I won't unleash all the nerd on you just yet, but we'll get there. We'll get there over the next couple weeks. So moving right into it. Speaking of Star Wars, it is a topic in one of the segues for my discussion. I first want to jump to the end and Quintino style and talk about how John Milton's Paradise Lost took elements of the Bible and some Hebrew influence, but he took those characters and he basically expanded on Genesis. And when I read that, the first scene that came to mind was actually Inglourious Bastards, and movies where it's traditional events with an alternate history. Disclaimer now, whether I believe in the Bible or not really doesn't matter. But we're going to go off of the fact that, this was an expanded on the history of the Bible, which at that point was, held to gospel. No pun intended. Anyway, so getting back on track, the Inglourious Bastard thing, that's just a segue into what my mind was thinking when I read it. But we're trying to find, a crossroad and where it comes back, and I think what it comes down to, if we think about it, is we get these great pieces of literature that end up being timeless. And can't do a post without it. Being culturally relevant or generational, like we talked about last week, that's cool, but elevating to being timeless is when you transcend. We talked about last week how some of these writings, you miss the mark. These Avenger movies 30 years from now, they're gonna be like, oh, these are amazing superhero movies, but what's with all these buildings falling? Because that was a generational thing, it was a cultural thing. But when we get deeper than that, the way that John Milton has, you reach that level where it's timeless. And by that I mean you've created something that, even though the language perhaps and the surface of it has a culture tied to it, the themes are timeless. And because of that, it will transfer with each generation and it will be made relevant. So that's kind of along the lines. So a way that this week's discussion post actually appealed to me without logging in, okay? I like to tie it into my own life. There's a TV show. If you got kids, I love cartoons. To this day, I love to watch cartoons, so it's a blessing having kids because I have an excuse. There's a TV show out right now called Clarence. I'm sitting down watching with my 2 older kids, and in this episode at the end, teacher, Clarence thought he was going to be in big trouble for something, and come to find out he gets let off easy because the teacher realizes that's what he needs. Teacher stops him in the doorway. It's like, Clarence, don't forget whatever happened to the man who suddenly got everything he wanted. Clarence turns around. He's like, what happened? And the teacher's like, he lived happily ever after. And that hit a spark with me. I'm like, I know I've heard that. I know it's important. What's going on here? So, in today's world, it was super easy. Hit up Google. Boom, boom. Willy Wonka. Love Willy Wonka. Okay? Not the Johnny Depp version, as much as I love Johnny Depp. So, all I could think about all week, Willy Wonka. My kids are 7 and 6. That movie came out in 1971. I was like, kids, we're watching this movie called Willy Wonka about some kids that go in a chocolate factory and crazy stuff happens. They were excited. We watched it last night. They never once lost interest. Now, on the surface, that's because, it's a kid's appeal, but it has that timeless theme, of the young kid who has morals and conviction, rising above, being put against other kids who don't carry those traits. Kids that, now that I'm an adult, I see they over-exaggerated those themes. Almost as if to put the sins in there. But either way, it's a tie-in to this week's discussion because it plays on these timeless themes. And these writers that take those themes and they apply them so perfectly that they get put in their own canon where they're never going to be taken out. And for me, Willy Wonka was one of those pieces. So, how is that a big deal? Cool. The John Milton article. Great article. I love learning about people. That was nice. It was interesting. I took from that he was, I'm not going to say spoiled, but to play to the stereotype spoiled rich kid, went to school forever, got to come home, live in study on his own. But he experienced some stuff. He immersed himself in it. You never want to judge somebody because of the opportunities they had, because he obviously took advantage of it. He knew what he wanted out of life. He immersed himself into it, and he wrote. I can definitely respect that. So when we get to Paradise Lost, that's where I think these timeless themes come into play. All right, so and part of the article that we were supposed to read, it talks about how the characters can be applied. Besides the fact that we all know whether you believe in the Bible's teachings or not, I'll tell people go to hell all the time. Whether or not I believe in hell doesn't really matter. It's now a term that people understand what I'm trying to get across, regardless of whether I believe in the place or not. So, getting off track, the article talks about 9/11 and how there's a part in the story that the devil basically doesn't want to see other people happy, goes in their backyard, tears down wreck shop, and that's where it kind of clicked finally. The reason that this story can go full circle and people can't understand it anymore because the language has evolved so much, but they're still like, I gotta read it, I gotta get through it, is because it's a timeless theme. And the most basic, to me, applies to kids. It's a children's story. It's a kid growing up. Parent wants it, and I don't want anybody to take this as me saying Adam or Eve the wrong way, but I want to look at it as Eve as a child, Adam as a parent, and go with it that route. It's and God for that instance, trying to protect your kid, and your kid's like, whoa, how am I supposed to ever be great if I'm only doing what you've asked me to do, and you're constantly putting up these walls. So as parents, we're like, you know what, you're right. As you get a little older, we give you a little more freedom, you do your thing. But what happens? That sin is out there. Satan is out there. And we know that. But we're trying to do the smart thing, like our child has convinced us. We got to let them go. But what you don't understand, and where the story has become timeless, is Satan can be right in front of you, and even though you think Satan's bad, the world can trick you into thinking it's good. So like the moment in the story where they talk about how Satan is being exposed, take that as trying to teach your kids not to smoke. It says they're right on the label. They've got all these commercials that you're going to die. Drink it, The sin is right in front of your face, yet you still stumble. You still go through it. And that's where, you don't think about it when you're reading because it's subconscious, but you're making those connections that on the most basic level, this is life. And that's why this story has remained such a crucial part of the timeless canon, as I would put it. And there's a TED Talks, and I'm going to post a link with this video if somebody feels. I like listening to TED Radio. And there's one on creativity that also ties into this perfectly. And it talks about, the opening is talking about Slick Rick, how in the 80s La Di Da Di Da came out. and that is, according to the TED Talks, the most sampled song. So this TED Talk on creativity basically says that what we consider a new idea, a new thought, creative thought, never is. It always stems from something. So when you make something that is so grand, it came from somewhere else. Something is in it. All these songs that we listen to, there's NWA songs, there's current songs, Snoop Dogg songs, all of these songs that have sampled Slick Rick's La-Di-Da-Di-Da. And that's, it leads into Steve Jobs quoting Picasso. What is it? Great, I think it's good artists borrow, great artists steal. And that's because to be a great artist, you realize that you can take something from before and make it more current. You can evolve it. And that's all we're doing in life. So what does that mean? That means that there is a baseline. If all creativity is just an evolution on the previous, that means there's a base. There's a core in there. And so if there's a core, that means there's a unifying fact among all these generations. And if you make something timeless, it'll always tie back to that core directly. You get to skip all the other stuff, boom, right to the core. It'll hit anybody. If you can get them to understand it, it'll hit anybody. And that's what Paradise Lost is. And that's the kind of literature that has, propelled this gentleman into, a timeless author. So that's where the person doesn't really matter. It was the creativity and the perfect addition to the Bible would have been, his core piece right there, what he added on. And he did it in such a way that, religious or not, you can tie back to it. So this is probably the fourth time in my higher learning that I've had to do some works in relation to this this poem. But this is the first time I really think I've made a connection as to why it's important. And that's big when it comes to literature classes. So if you have time, you should really check out the TED Talks. I'll post down below. It's a pretty amazing one. And if you ever get bored, there's a podcast. Now I sound like I'm putting on a show, but you can go onto your iPod or your iPhone and get the podcast for free $99. And all the TED Talks make you feel smart, make you feel good about yourself. So again, thanks for watching. R2 appreciates it, and can't wait to talk to you again next week. Thank you.